I'm very excited to be here today. How are you? So I'm Vera, and in this short talk, we will talk about hacking flow computers. But before we will talk about what flow computers are, let me introduce myself. So I'm Vera Mens, a vulnerability researcher at Team 82. Team 82 is a vulnerability research team by Clarity. We are targeting mostly OT, IoT, and medical sectors, from the field devices themselves to the SCADA system. While I'm mostly focusing on the embedded devices, because that's what I enjoy doing. I have been in BSidesTLV team for 3 years now, and I hope that you have enjoyed the CTFs this week. So let's start. Let's hope it works. So what are the flow computers? So as the name suggests, flow computers perform flow measurements, which is calculates how much gas or liquid goes through the pipes in each moment. And there's a lot of places that use this type of computers. I'm sorry. Which is gas and oil processing plants is one of the example, or each other plant, water plant or something like that takes substance from one point to another through pipes. And the flow computers, I'm sorry, there's something wrong with this one. And flow computers come in various shapes and sizes, and they can be mounted on the wall and on the pipe, as we can see here. And messing with those computers, it is a pretty big deal. Not mentioning is the stuff that Marina talked about them at the keynote, but flow of oil, the more flow means more money. And for some reason, people do care about oil prices. So we would like to save those computers safe from the attackers, right? And that's what we would like to remember along this lecture. So we are ready to meet our device. This is ABB's micro flow computer. Maybe I need to stand right here. Right. So this is a bare PCB with an ARM CPU attached to it. It can be connected to the tiny LCD and the battery. It has a metal enclosure in case of rain, and it can be mounted directly on the pipe. So we just need to put in mind, so this is a computer that's connected to the pipe, and it will calculate the flow of any substance that come through that pipe, especially gas and oil. That is what it's made of, right? And let's look what is within the computer. So we have our ARM CPU, 32 bits, like any other similar device to it. And we have Ethernet and serial ports as I/O ports. We have a Linux operating system on that computer, which is quite convenient for us. And the main two protocols that implemented is Modbus, which is a fairly popular protocol that's used in many OT devices, as well as TOTALFLOW protocol. We will talk about it a little bit later. It is proprietary protocol developed by the ABB itself. And it uses it for configuring the device, view flow measurements, and many other stuff. And the main component of this device, the one that we will talk about today, is the main application. This is the application that comes on when the device boots up, the tiny device that we saw earlier, and it stays on along as the device is on. And what it does, it is the main application of the computer, which means some calculation for the flows that can be quite complicated in mathematical point of view. And it can do some alarm management with configuration interface, and the configuration one is what we will care about. And another important part of the system is the client, the TOTALFLOW client. It is the client that can be downloaded from the website, from a BBA website, and the operators that download the client can connect to any device that talks TOTALFLOW protocol, like our own, to make a configuration, to view flow measurement, and so on. So there is two main features, security features that are implemented within the device. We have our security button, security switch that is mounted on the PCB itself. It's a button that we can touch. And what it does, it enables or disables the security passcode. Security passcode is a 4-digit number that is sent with every TOTALFLOW payload. TOTALFLOW is a protocol. It has payload, header, and like any other protocol. And each payload has its passcode along it. And if the passcode is correct, the one the device is expected to get, the payload is received and the response is sent. Otherwise, we will get an error. So this is our security mechanism. And this is a pretty cool computer, right? Not the one that we used to see in everyday life. And it can be pretty cool to hack it. And we need to set a goal for our research. And as I said before, the more flow means more money. So it can be pretty cool if we could just to control the device and make the device to report a little less flow or a part of the flow that really is within the pipe, so we pay less. Since the devices are located somewhere in the desert, in the oil and gas plants, we would like to do it remotely from our home. No one wants to wait in the lines in the debug. So our goal here will be pre-authenticated remote code execution on the device. And while this is a pretty common goal in those kind of devices, it's not always possible, but I'm here today talking to you, so it went pretty well. So first thing first, we need to read the documents, the manuals, right? It is not the device that we used to. Maybe it's the one that we first heard of. And there is a lot of information to get from it. And we would like to get the more information as we can from the manuals before we start to reverse engineer it. And the most important thing that we would like to get is how the operators that just bought the device would configure it, right? If we well understand how the operator configures, how it connects the device from the client, we will understand our context of research. And it will be quite a good start. And And before we will go to building a setup and hack it, we need to get the firmware. So what is the firmware? Firmware is a Merle package, in our case, that has everything that needs for the device to run, for the main application to run. It means it has a bootloader, the kernel, the file system, and any other files that needed. And often those firmware packages are available online, and the availability of the firmware is pretty critical. If we don't have our firmware online and we don't have any other way to get it, it pretty much can stop our project altogether. Nothing to do from here. But we were lucky, the firmware were online, and the time that we have from getting the firmware until we start to reverse engineer it depends on various of things. One of them is whether the firmware is encrypted, signed, whether it works with an architecture that our disassemblers understand, right? Whether it runs on operating systems that is familiar for us as researchers. And in this project, it went quite well, as you can see. And in a matter of a couple of hours, we had all the files needed to start to reverse engineer it. But before we started to reverse engineer it and understand what it is, we need a setup. The setup is pretty important. We want to get the setup as soon as we like. We want to know how the setup, how our target behaves on some payload. And the first option, and the obvious one, is just to buy it, right? And it's a great option. We will have all the peripherals we want. We have the whole system emulation. We won't need to worry about patching that interaction. And although it's quite expensive, in our team, we sometimes it happens that we buy the toys that we are playing with. Like this one, you have all the racks. Each device here is a PLC or HMI that we are happy to hack it every time we get. But the unfortunate thing is that it's not always possible, right? And Flaw computers for gas are not that popular on eBay as USB cables. And in this case, we understood that we had to hack the computer without an actual device. And luckily for us, there is a pretty good alternative to it. Since we do not interested in bootloader and kernel research in this target, we can just take the file system itself and just copy it to ready-to-use ARM machine, any ARM machine. We took a Raspberry Pi. Any other ARM machine will do. And this is a great choice. It's easy to set up. We are just copying one directory from one place to another. But is a really clear disadvantage. Our main binary will, at some point, we will want to talk with the peripherals, and it just won't able to because our Raspberry Pi don't have the sensors and the pipes that the normal computer will be attached to, and we will need to pad them. And we will see how it's done. So first, as I said, we will just tag the file systems, the root file system within lib and bin directories that we are used to, and we will copy them from the firmware to the Raspberry Pi. That's it. That's the first step. And the second step is to, sorry? That went out. OK. And the second step is quite an important one. We need to find the main binary. It's not that obvious. It's a first look. And if you remember, I said that main binary is the one that starts at boot. So inid is a really good place to look for those. And this is where we found ours. It doesn't have as a pretty clarified name as main binary run me, but this step is quite easy. The much harder step is the next one. So we have our main binary, we found one, and now we can root to our file system and make the root, make a root context be the new file system that we are just copied to Raspberry Pi, and we are ready to run the device. What will happen soon after we will run it, the main binary will crash. Why? It's just trying to talk with its sensors, with its peripherals, and since our Raspberry Pi doesn't have some, it will crash. And in these cases, we need to patch the binary. OK, so what do I mean by patching? So our main binary is just an assembly code. it's in ARM architecture. So what we do in that case, we will take the function that is responsible to talking with the peripherals and just remove the function from the binary, remove the assembly code, and put some no operation instead of it. We will pack the binary back, and we will run it again. And we will do it as long as needed until the main binary is up and running and waiting for connection from the client. And in our case, it went pretty good. We patched only 7 functions, and within a couple of hours, we had our setup, which is quite nice. So this is our Flow computer, no pipes or anything fancy, but it won't stop us from hacking it, and that's what is important. So we are now coming to the step in our research that we can review our attack vectors. Remember that I said that our attack should be remotely available. We do not want to plug some USB within the device in some distant plant. And only remotely available endpoints are relevant to us. The first thing that we would like to look for is the web server, right? The ones that implemented within the device, but unfortunately for us, none exist. SSH is a good option as well, but it's disabled by default, and we need to call an operator support to obtain the key, and no one likes to make calls right now, right? Modbus is a Modbus protocol, you remember we talked about. It's available option for us, but this protocol is available, reviewed, and it has pretty narrow attack surface, so it's not that perfect for us. But fortunately for us, we have another option. We have the TOTALFLOW protocol, which is a proprietary and not documented protocol that is used to configure the device. And this is sounded a good way to go, and it was. So just to recap what we have up until now, we have our client, TOTALFLOW client. We downloaded it from the ABB web server, and it can connect to any device that supports TOTALFLOW protocol, right? And we have our main binary that runs on our Raspberry Pi, and it emulates the Flow computer, the real Flow computer, and it waits for the connection from the client. And it's a good time to just to connect them together and see what we got. So this is what we got. This is a screenshot from Wireshark, and we see that the protocol is binary one. It has some ASCII header, which is good for us. We know that we are reviewing the correct protocol. That's nice, but nothing else is understood for us, and our job is pretty clear. We need to reverse engineer the protocol. We need to understand it. We need to find the bug within it, and we need to exploit it. So that's fun, and it is. So let's start. So right now, we will look at 2 main approaches for reverse engineering the protocol. The main binary that we got within the firmware was strip binary, no symbols whatsoever. We don't know what's going on, and to find a code base that is relevant for us is not that obvious. So we need to find something that will have a pretty good clue that we are on the right track. And there is some places that we can look at. One of them is CRC lookup tables and some socket operations, port numbers. And another thing is that we can match our strings from the binary, from the client to the binary, and see if there is some matching strings in order to find some functionalities that will be relevant for us. And once we found the functions that is relevant for our protocol, we can just run the main binary within a GDB. We can break on those functions and look for investigate the stack trace back and forth until we understand the protocol. So after many, many hours, that's what we came up with. And please note that not every bit and byte is tagged here. We do not understand everything, but we understand enough in order to construct the payload ourselves. Right now, we can write our own client in Python or whatever, just to be able to talk with the device without any client. And there is only one thing that I want to put your attention to it, and these 2 bytes, OK? So remember the 4-digit passcode that I talked about? This is 2 bytes that are CRC16 of that passcode. So those are 2 bytes that indicate whether the client is authorized to make the request or not. So I hope that you are getting with me here that we have our first vulnerability. So we have an authentication bypass, and let's talk about how it works. So we just pick some passcode, 4-digit passcode, and we will put it in our client. The client will perform the CRC16 and will send it to the server, to our Raspberry Pi. And the Raspberry Pi will check the CRC code. If it's one that he expects, the correct one, he will receive the payload, and in other case, he will send an error. So we have a pretty good indication if our passcode is the correct one. And from here, the attack is pretty straightforward. With no rate limit mitigation available, we can just calculate all CRC16 or 4-digit space and just send the code one after another until we get a correct one, something like 1 minute. That's cool. So being authenticated, it's cool. We are now able to do from our Python client the same thing that our authenticated user can do from Windows machine, from Windows client. And that's pretty cool, but remember, we want to execute arbitrary code on those devices. And being authenticated is not enough. We need to find another bug. And there is a good place to look for those, and this is file operations. So fortunately for us, we have one. An operator that maintains the device can download and upload configuration files in case he wants to duplicate a configuration or maybe download some logs. And let's just investigate how it looks like in Wireshark. And as we see here, we see that the whole path is forwarded within the payload of what file we want to read. So the question is pretty obvious. Can we path reverse it? Can we just come back to the root directory and read any other file maybe? Do they mitigate against path reversal? So let's find out. So what we do is we have our client, we understand the protocol, we can write any payload that we want. And the obvious things, the obvious file to look for is the etc shadow file. And that's what we do. We just put a path that traverses back to the root and ask for etc shadow. I'm sorry. That click here is quite bad. So there is a spoiler within the slides. I hope so you didn't see it. So we saw this one. This is compressed payload. We see it from those 2 bytes. And the moment it's gone, but I will show you again. After we will decompress it in our client, this is the file that we get. And I hope that the file is familiar to you. This is how ETC shadow looks like. So it looks like we can read an arbitrary file within the device. This is a sensitive information. Client and no one else should be able to get these files. And the write files download to the device itself works pretty the same way. And now we have arbitrary read and write primitive on the device. In other words, the target is ours. It's now just a matter of how we exploit it. And the easiest way to exploit it is just to turn on the SSH. Remember that I told you that it is disabled by default. So and has an authentication key. So it's pretty simple. We will just enable the SSH. We'll put our key to the authorized keys files, and let's see how we did it. So we need first to authenticate. We authenticate with dictionary attack, the same way that I described before. And then we use our path traversal vulnerability to ask for authorized keys file. It's not the file that, that should be available to the attacker and any other client. This is a file that will save all the keys that SSH will agree to authenticate with, and we will just generate our own key pair and put the file back. And we will use the same path traversal vulnerability in order to put the file back. And we will enable the SSH just the way the client would do it. And we have the SSH connection with root, because what other user can do it, right? So this is a short demo. This is, oh. Does it work? Yay. So this one takes some other approach with SSH configuration files, but this is the same thing, basically. We just took the SSH config. We do some our magic to it. So now what we can do is to SSH to our device. And we have root on the device. So that was quite cool, right? There is a pretty large impact to it, right? Marina talked about it, and let us think for it for a moment. And for us, I would like just to go on the summary of what we saw. We learned what Flaw computers are, that we can hack them without the real device, how to reverse engineer the proprietary protocol, that we have no knowledge about it, and how to get a free gas for life. So that's it. I hope that you enjoyed the talk. Feel free to reach me out and ask questions.